The year is 1984. The Cold War is in full swing. People are scared, and they make movies about it. This is Threads.
There's growing evidence overnight from scientists and observers in many countries that there have been 2 nuclear explosions in the Middle East.
In response to today's news of the outbreak of hostilities between vessels of the United States and Soviet navies,
the Ministry of Defence has announced it's sending more troops to Europe to reinforce the British commitment to NATO.
This time, they are playing with, at best, the destruction of life as we know it, and at worst, total annihilation. You cannot win.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Movie Punditry's Random Rewatch. This is Mike, and we are tackling the 1984 BBC film Threads. Now, this is going to be an unusual one because we don't normally do television movies, but this is kind of an important film. And I recently watched the Netflix movie A House of Dynamite, starring Idris Elba and Rebecca Ferguson, Tracy Letts, Jared Harris, Anthony Ramos. And it's a Cold War film, which is not something that we've seen a lot of lately. But it's kind of a modern Cold War film. You know, after the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991, there was a lot of films about Russian extremists getting their hands on former Soviet munitions. And that's kind of the idea of what A House of Dynamite is they don't really know who launched the missile that they see incoming. And it's basically a triptych that tells the same story of the same 18 minutes from 3 different points of view. And it got me to thinking about all the movies, especially in the 80s, that were really engaged in the idea of the Cold War, of nuclear exchange, of what would happen if the United States and the Soviet Union really started throwing nukes at each other. And there was a whole string of these films, starting really back in the 60s. I mean, you had films like Dr. Strangelove and Failsafe. Getting into like the 80s, you had movies like Testament, War Games, and Miracle Mile, which all these films told the story of what would happen if we were on the brink of a nuclear exchange or if a nuclear exchange had happened. But there were 2 films, both television movies, one in the United States, one in Britain. The one in the United States was called The Day After. It was produced by ABC, and it starred Jason Robards, Georgianne Johnson, John Cullum, Bibi Besh, a young Jo Beth Williams, a young Steve Guttenberg, a very young Wayne Knight, Amy Madigan, John Lithgow. It was very much a Hollywood movie. It was a big deal at the time because a lot of these people, these were all film actors, and they were showing up on this television movie, which was kind of a big deal. But this was a very clearly a Hollywood picture with stars that you recognized, and it had kind of the typical Hollywood movie arc to it where there's, you know, kind of a ray of sunshine at the end of it. The British film, Threads, is the opposite of this in every way. It's not slick. It's not super well produced. There's virtually nobody in it that anybody would recognize. More importantly, there's no real hope in it. This is possibly the most depressing film I've ever seen. But I think it's still important to watch things like this. So let's get into it and let's find out where this film came from and what it can do for us. So in 1965, for release in 1966, the BBC created a docudrama called The War Game. Despite the fact that the BBC created it to be televised, it never was at the time. It did receive some limited theatrical release, but the government at the time, this was the Wilson government, decided that this film was just too much for television audiences to handle. So the film was never broadcast on television. It didn't actually get televised at all until I think it was 1985, so 20 years after it was made. But in the 1980s, the director general of the BBC, a man named Alistair Milne, had watched the movie and decided that it was time to create a film for that time and for British audiences. It was given the working title of Beyond Armageddon. So he hired a television director by the name of Mick Jackson. So in the 1980s, there was a British documentary series called QED. And one of the episodes, the one that Jackson directed, was called A Guide to Armageddon, which is basically what would happen if a 1-ton nuclear bomb or 1 megaton nuclear bomb was exploded over London. And Jackson did a lot of research on this area. He spoke to doctors and psychologists and defense experts in both the United States and in Great Britain to talk about what would happen if the worst happened. What would happen to society if a nuclear bomb went off or if a nuclear exchange happened? Now, Jackson at the time was well known for directing documentaries and some real hard-hitting documentaries. He would go on to do more dramatic pictures. He would direct the movie LA Story in 1991, The Bodyguard in 1992, and a couple of other movies. Barry Hines was brought in to do the screenplay. He was a novelist as well as a screenwriter and had done half a dozen films up until the point of Threads. Hines spent some time at the Home Office, which is kind of the part of the British government that deals with the operation of the government. And they were running a program to teach designated survivors. And Hines felt that it was so disorganized that he was absolutely sure that society would collapse in the event of an actual nuclear strike on the island of Great Britain. One of the areas of contention between Hines and Jackson was that Jackson wanted the narration to fill in kind of the narrative gaps, and Hines was dead set against it. But Jackson was the director, so he got what he wanted. The mid-sized British city of Sheffield was picked as the base of the movie because it was thought to be a good target. It's a industrial city. We'll talk about that a little bit later. And there is an RAF base that had a NATO wing with U.S. fighter planes in it locally. And so it was thought to be an average British city that would be a likely target in the event that the British Isles were targeted. There is no composer listed in the credits because there is no music in this film, which is a choice, and it's a pretty significant one. It is very noticeable in its absence. Before we jump into the film directly, I do want to take another minute to talk about The Day After. 1983 ABC film. That was inspired by a feature film called The China Syndrome, which starred Jane Fonda and Michael Douglas, which involved an accident at a nuclear plant in California. Fictional, obviously. Edward Hume was the writer. Nicholas Myers was chosen to direct. He had just come off doing Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. And as I said, that movie is everything this one is not. It is a glossy, hopeful at the end story with a lot of familiar faces in it. Threads is none of that. Threads very much feels like a documentary. It's interspaced with these cards that come up with facts and figures, and I'll talk about them as we get to that point in the movie. And then it's also has narrations at particular points to go over some information and some exposition that is not really easy to do in the story itself. But then other than that, it's shot in a very stark style. It's a very bland color palette, a lot of handheld camera work, a lot of real close-ups. The sound's not particularly great, probably by design, and it very much feels like it's a documentary of sorts. And I think that adds to the realism of the story and kind of the feeling of dread that you get while you're watching it. So let's dive into Threads. So we get a title card that we are in Sheffield, England, and that the date is Saturday, March 5th. And there is an opening narration which kind of frames our story for
In
us.
an urban society, everything connects. Each person's needs are fed by the skills of many others. Our lives are woven together in a fabric. But the connections that make society strong also make it vulnerable.
The narrator here is Paul Vaughan. He is a British journalist and a radio presenter, focusing a lot on arts and sciences. He's a well-known voice in the UK. If I had to guess, I'd say he's probably the most well-known of the participants in this film at the point that it's released. So once the narration is over, we meet our protagonists. We have Ruth Beckett, played by Karen Meager, and Jimmy Kemp, played by Reese Dinsdale. Meager got her first start in a 1979 television series called The Mallons, where she played a maid. She was then in a children's show and a couple of small parts. But this is probably by far her biggest role. Reese Dinsdale, probably more of a theater actor than a television actor, but he did do some early television work. He's also a writer, director, still working as far as I know. Interspersed throughout this, we hear, starting in the background and then kind of moving its way forward, we hear these news stories, and it becomes apparent that there is a conflict going on in Iran between the United States and the Soviet Union, which is a thing that actually happened, and that conflict is escalating, and there's a lot of tensions in the region. Basically, the United States has installed a government there, and then the Soviet Union invaded it. This is in the movie. But the young people in the movie don't seem particularly interested in the news. In fact, there's one scene where they're in the bar or at a party or something, and Jimmy changes the channel off the news into sports. Same thing happens when him and Ruth are sitting in the car. He changes the radio from the news to sports, which prompts her to get mad at him. But we find out fairly soon that Ruth is pregnant. We get more news reports. This one on the TV.
This film, shot secretly by a West German television crew on Tuesday, shows one of the Soviet convoys on the move in northern Iran. The convoys were first spotted by United States satellites on Monday, moving across 3 of the mountain passes leading from the Soviet Union. The Soviet foreign minister has defended the incursions and has accused the United States of deliberately prompting...
This is Leslie Judd, who is a British television presenter and also was a host of a children's program in the 1970s. The calendar jumps forward to May 8th. We see some newspaper covers with headlines about the conflict in Iran. Jimmy is telling his family about the baby and about Ruth being pregnant, and lets them know that he and her are going to get married. They are not particularly thrilled with that idea.
Point is, what are you going to do about it?
We're going to get married.
What for?
Because we want to. What do you think?
You don't have to, you know, Jimmy. I wouldn't want you thinking we were pushing you into it.
Nobody's pushing us into out. It's what we want. We've decided.
We also meet, in addition to his parents, we meet his younger brother Michael and his sister Allison. And we find out that Jimmy also keeps birds. He's got a little aviary out in the yard, or as they call it in the UK, in the garden. There is news regarding an ultimatum or a deadline for a withdrawal of the Soviet Union from Iran. But again, at this point, the news stories are still, they're kind of a background piece.
The time now 7:30, Douglas Barton with tonight's headlines. The United States has hinted it may send troops to the Middle East if the Russians don't move their forces out of Iran. The Prime Minister has joined the chorus of Western leaders calling for immediate withdrawal and has spoken of a serious threat to world
We get a title card that describes to us what Sheffield is. That Sheffield is the 4th largest city in Britain. Its main products are steel, engineering, and chemicals. That there's a NATO air base nearby. So the calendar now jumps us to May 11th. This is a trope that we will see, that there's a kind of a calendar counting, and it's letting us know what the timeline of this. So we started in March. Now we are in May. Jimmy is going to Ruth's parents' house, with his parents, and they're all going to sit down and they're all going to meet the two families as they're coming together. We hear another news story that there is a United States Navy submarine that has disappeared. So obviously that's going to become a problem. We now go to May 12th. There's a collision between a Soviet warship and a United States warship, the Kirov and the Callahan. Ruth and Jimmy have gotten an apartment, one that needs a lot of work, so they're gonna have to clean it up. We find out that the Soviet Union had attacked the American submarine, and we hear a news conference from the President of the United States.
The unprovoked attack on our submarine and the move into Iran are the actions of a reckless and warlike power. I have to warn the Soviets, in the clearest possible terms, that they risk taking us to the brink of an armed confrontation with incalculable consequences for all.
We know that the tensions are escalating, and we get another decent piece of narration from Vaughn, and this is talking about emergency plans and
Britain
wartime
has emergency
preparation.
plans for war. If central government should ever fail, power can be transferred instead to a system of local officials dispersed across the country. In an urban district like Sheffield, there is already a designated wartime controller. He's the city's peacetime chief executive. If it should suddenly become necessary, he can be given
So
full
we find out in
powers
the
of
event
internal
of
government.
war, if the central government breaks down, that the local government has broad-ranging authority, and that there are designated people to be in charge in the event that the central government is not able to function. And so we meet Clive Sutton, who is the local controller in Suffield, and he is the designated wartime controller who would be in charge in the event of a war. This is Harry Beattie. He's probably most well known for the TV show Coronation Street, but a fairly well-known, I wouldn't even say well-known, a fairly familiar British character actor. I think he's great in this, by the way. He is very British and very much about, doing the proper thing and doing his duty, but you also get these flashes of his exasperation and his fear, really, as this process goes through. And we see that he's been given a list of people who are to report somewhere in the event of a war. And pretty significantly, we see that like his wife and family are not on that list. So if there is, in fact, a nuclear war and he's got to go into a bunker, he's going to have to leave his family behind. As I suspect all these people are going to. We see that the stores are busy. People are starting to stock up, and there's a sense of tension growing. If you're below, let's say 40, you probably don't remember the Cold War at all. And this idea that, the world could end on any given day was a very real thing, especially in situations like this where there was tension between the two superpowers. And so the British here, because this is, in this fictionalized version, it's probably higher than it's ever been in real life, fortunately, other than maybe the Cuban Missile Crisis. They're starting to just kind of prepare, just like we might these days for like a storm, like we knew a hurricane or a nor'easter or something were coming. We might stock up on supplies and things like that. That's kind of what's going on here. The calendar ticks off to May 19th. We see Clive checking over on food supplies and logistics. We see that there is a blockade in the Persian Gulf. We see F-4 Phantoms flying over on their way to the airbase at RAF Finningley. We see Jimmy and Bob, his friend Bob, in a pub. And even though Jimmy has a pregnant girlfriend and he's about to get married, him and Bob are looking at a couple of girls. Way to go, Jimmy. People are starting to pay attention to the news more. We see that the UK is supporting the US in calling for Soviet withdrawal and in providing staging areas and stuff for American troops. We see Clive still in his office continuing to work on things, and he's also looking at fuel supplies.
To the Director Technical Services, please let me know what fuel stocks are currently held in each depot. Please ensure that tanks are kept topped up and that no fuel is used except for essential works only.
And this is the kind of thing, in the event of a government collapse or in the event of a nuclear attack, you're only going to have the supplies that are on hand, potentially. So he's just trying to, make sure that he can provide for the area of his responsibility. And so he's starting to concentrate on the resources that he's going to need. Where on May 21st, the ultimatum, the deadline for the withdrawal has passed, but the United States and the Soviet Union are trying to negotiate a joint withdrawal. Britain has sent troops into Europe, the mainland. We see that there are protests. There are, anti-war protests. There are anti-nuclear protests. A lot of people are like, look, this isn't our fight. Let's just stay out of it. We see that the United Kingdom government, the UK government, has taken over the cross-channel ferries and British Airways in order to move troops and control supplies. And they're talking about on the news how this is just a temporary measure. It's just a safety measure, and they don't expect that this is going to last. You see that there's a peace rally, and things are still pretty much going, normal day-to-day life, but tensions are definitely ticking up. We're on May 23rd now. We're starting to see that there are some shortages because people are buying in, hoarding fuel and food and supplies. We find out that the ultimatum has completely expired and that the United States has sent B-52s to attack a Russian base in Mashhad in Iran, that the Russians have used a series of nuclear-tipped missiles to take out the B-52s. So now there's a attack on the B-52s. They're shot down. The United States responds by using a tactical battlefield nuke over the Soviet airbase. So now there's been a very limited exchange of nuclear armament in Iran, and that stops. So the Soviets use nuclear tip missile. The Americans use a very small nuke to take out the airbase, and then everything kind of settles down a little bit. Where May 23rd, people are starting to panic buy. Shopkeepers are gouging their prices and raising prices, which leads to obviously people getting very angry with them, and that is going to lead to looting. We see a scene where they're in a store and they're arguing with the shopkeeper, and then there's a news report about the attack, the nuclear attack, and people just who are online waiting with their groceries, they just start heading for the door. And we're seeing that kind of all over the place. People are they're just taking what they need right now. We see that the emergency powers have been activated. The government has now given itself more authority. People are starting to leave the cities. We see the roads are starting to clog up and people are starting to pack up and move out of at least Sheffield, but we're hearing it's other cities as well. I guess they figure that, the cities are population centers. If there's going to be an attack, that's where the attack's going to be. And so they're packing up. We see, I think it's Jimmy's parents watching their neighbors pack up and leave. And we see that Clive is trying to requisition materials, and that the government has given the authority to local people, the local controllers, to requisition whatever materials they need in order to keep themselves supplied, which basically means the government can come in and take what it needs from businesses.
Local authorities have been given the power to suspend certain peacetime functions and to requisition premises and materials for civil defense purposes. A government spokesman said that this was a precautionary move only. It was not a cause for alarm.
We hear that there are riots in both the U.S. and in Europe, that hospitals are emptied in preparation of casualties coming in. We see, I think it's Ruth's parents bringing Ruth's grandmother out of a nursing home and into their flat. We see that roads are being closed so that the government vehicles have access to them, and that the government is rounding up known subversives and arresting them. Clive is told that he has to head to the bunker, and so he needs to leave his wife and his children. And off he goes, and they start to set up the bunker, which is under the city hall. We see a peace rally that is raided by police. And we see that workers are taking works of art out of a museum and packing it up. We hear an announcement on the radio about attack preparation, how to be prepared, and telling people that they are better off
you and your
staying
family
in their
must take
home.
cover at once. Do not stay out of doors. If you are caught in the open, lie down. If you leave your home, your local authority may take it over for homeless families. And if you move, the authorities in the new place will not help you with food, accommodation, or other essentials. You are better off.
The crying that you're hearing in the background of that clip is Ruth. This is Ruth and Jimmy are working on their new apartment. They're taking old wallpaper off the walls, and the radio is playing, and she starts to break down while this announcement is going on. Now we'll go to May 26th, and there's more announcements, and this one is particularly gruesome as this announcer, this radio presenter, is very matter-of-factly telling us what to do in the event that you have a dead body in your bunker.
If anyone dies while you are kept in your fallout room, move the body to another room in the house. Label the body with name and address, and cover it as tightly as possible in polythene, paper, sheets, or blankets. If, however, you have had a body in the house for more than 5 days, and if it is safe to go outside, then you should bury the body for the time.
There's also instructions on how to make a lean-to in your house so that you can be protected in case things fall down, in case the structure collapses around you. There's all kinds of, info on fallout. We see that the banks have been frozen and that the attack warning is red, which means that there is an attack imminent. And then we hear the air raid sirens, and we find out that there has been an attack at 08:35 in the morning. The Soviets have detonated a nuclear bomb over the North Sea, which has the effect of taking out communications in the British Isles and in northwestern Europe. At 08:37, there is a missile strike. So now there are missiles that have landed in the United Kingdom. Jimmy is going to try to get out to Ruth. That's about the last we're going to see of him. Due to title cards, we find out that the initial attack, between 2.5 and 9 million people have died, that there is going to be radiation sickness, that there's going to be panic. We find out that the exchange has continued to escalate, and now we are in a full-scale nuclear war. We see a lot of destruction. We see a lot of silence. We see a card that says 2/3 of the houses in Britain are in the fire zone. We see that Jimmy's mother has been injured very severely, and she has radiation burns. We see that somebody has died in the bunker where Clive and his staff are, and they're covering that body up. We hear a news report on, we hear a narration on fallout and the wind carrying fallout.
First fallout dust settles on Sheffield. It's an hour and 25 minutes after the attack. An explosion on the ground at Crewe has sucked up this debris and made it radioactive. The wind has blown it here. This level of attack has broken most of the windows in Britain. Many roofs are open to the sky. Some of the lethal dust gets in. In these early stages, the symptoms of radiation sickness and the symptoms of panic are identical.
We hear that, there's been explosions and that there's radioactive dust and the winds are carrying it, and that a lot of windows are broken, a lot of roofs are damaged, and so the dust is, just getting into people's houses. So the city's basically destroyed. We see a lot of arguments in the bunker over the destruction and how they're supposed to proceed, what they're supposed to do. The fact that they have some food and what are they going to do with it? We see the people that are going to be hungry. We see a card that says we're 1 week, that the food is controlled by the government. They have about a week's supply worth of food. And there's this conversation about, if people are sick and they're going to die anyway, why should we give them food? We should save the food for the healthy people and the people who are going to be able to work.
To authorise the release of buffer stocks, and then it becomes a counter
We
decision.
can't get through to county.
What are we going to do? Let them starve?
Look, even if we did have the authority...
Well, we're on our own. You've got the authority. But bloody time you did something with it.
Look, what's the point of wasting food on people who are going to die anyway?
I agree with Clive. The food stocks are not going to last long. A lot of people just didn't stock up.
How could they? The bloody shops were empty.
And now they're coming out of the shelters. I know it sounds
Ruth's grandmother dies. Ruth, she's had it. She can't stay cooped up in the apartment, so she goes out. We see people scavenging for food. We see that there are just bodies all over in the street. They show us a card that says that there's a total of 3,000 megatons exchanged, and that has put 500 million tons of radioactive gas into the atmosphere, which has had the effect of blocking out the sun. And we get another
Hanging
narration.
in the atmosphere, the clouds of debris shut out the sun's heat and light. Across large areas of the northern hemisphere, it starts to get dark. It starts to get cold. In the centers of large land masses like America or Russia, the temperature drop may be severe, as much as 25 degrees centigrade. Even in Britain, within days of the attack, it could fall to freezing or below for long.
Without the sun, the temperature could easily drop to below freezing. The date is now June 6th. We see that there's a riot at a food distribution center, that the government troops who are guarding it start to fire CS gas at the crowd. I think we're on June 11th now. Ruth goes into a hospital to look for Jimmy. We're back in the bunker, and we see them talking about, how are they going to ration food? And they figure out that it's going to be 1,000 calories for workers and 500 calories for people who can't work, which is basically a bowl of soup and a piece of bread. There's an argument about the fact that they have nowhere to put criminals, that people are looting, stealing, mugging people, taking whatever they can, and the government, the police are trying to keep an eye on it, but there's so many of them, they have nowhere to put them. The date's June 17th, and we see rats scavenging around in the city. We see a card that talks about the biggest problems now are cholera, dysentery, and typhoid. We see that the police are starting to just round looters up. They're not using their names. The police, they're anonymous. Kind of sounds familiar, right? That they're calling each other number one, number two, and they're just rounding up looters. We see that there's compulsory labor, that people are being told that they have to work in order to start cleaning up, clearing rubble, freeing up roadways, digging people out. And we hear that basically the only currency that exists right now is
Money
food.
has had no meaning since the attack. The only viable currency is food, given as reward for work or withheld as punishment. In the grim economics of the aftermath, there are two harsh realities. A survivor who can work gets more food than one who can't, and the more who die, the more food is left for the rest.
We hear that there's 20 million corpses laying around Britain, but they can't spare the workers to bury them, to dig graves, and they can't spare the fuel to have machinery dig graves. So the bodies are just, and they can't spare the fuel to burn them. So the bodies are just left to rot, which is going to cause more spreading of disease. The government has instigated martial law. There are curfews. There are detention camps for criminals. The government is going around and basically forcing people to have strangers live in the house. They're going up to houses. They have a list of houses, and they're going, okay, you have 4 rooms and only 2 people live here, so we're going to put 4 more people in your house, and you don't have a choice. All right, let's move to the next house. Ruth still wandering around and scavenging. She runs into Jimmy's friend Bob. They start to travel together. I think they're heading west. They're in Buxton, I think. And they come across a dead sheep out in the field. And they start to have this argument about whether or not they can eat it. And why is it dead? Has it been poisoned? Is it radioactive? Is it safe to eat? And Bob's like, look, you would taste it if it was bad. And they're, neither one of them knows anything about this. And they're just guessing. But at the end of the day, Bob's like, look, we don't have a choice. And so the two of them just start to literally just rip this dead sheep apart and eat it. So we see cards about how the attack was in the springtime. And so this cold and darkness over the summer during growing season is going to affect the harvest. They're almost out of fuel for tractors. So this harvest is going to be probably the only one they're going to have equipment to manage. So they have to make the most out of it. We see that Ruth goes into a barn by herself because Bob has left her, and she gives birth to her child all by herself. We find out that there's a narration, I think, about how winter affects the cold of the winter affects mostly the very young and the very old. So children and old people and sick people are the ones who are most likely to die. I think there's also some information about the radiation and birth defects and things along of those natures. So now we jump forward to 1 year after the attack. We see that people are actively selling rats as food. They're collecting rats and they're exchanging them. They're bartering them. We see Ruth has, obviously she has her baby. Sunlight is starting to return. However, the atmosphere is so damaged that the ozone layer has been stripped, and ultraviolet light is much, much stronger than it was prior to the war. And so people are getting skin cancer. People are getting cataracts at a much, much higher rate than they were previously. We see people working out in the field with, makeshift masks and hats on to protect them from the sun. We see cards about how in this second year, there's fertilizers are all gone, pesticides are all gone. So insects are attacking all the crops, and that the population in Britain has declined to almost medieval levels. We jump forward again. Now we're 10 years after the attack. We see Ruth and her daughter, Jane, are in a field and they are working. Ruth has really bad cataracts. You can see her eyes are very glazed over. She's very sick. They go back to, I guess, their living quarters or wherever they're staying. And she lays down. Jane tries to get her up. Jane, she's 10 years old, but she does not, or she's 11 years old, but she does not speak very well. She's trying to get her mother to get up. She's like, work, up, work. And Jane is just watching her mother die, basically, but is very emotionless about it. So Ruth dies. Jane basically goes through her belongings and takes what she wants and then leaves. We see that there's some electricity. There are some lights on. They have like a makeshift, I don't want to call it a school, but it's a room, and they're showing like old educational tapes to people Jane's age. But we find that people her age are not really able to speak very clearly. And we don't know, I mean, they're not really out there about it as to why. We don't know it's because there's no education system, or is it because there is some kind of mental deficiency due to the radiation? I suspect it's supposed to be both. Like this generation is not really capable of learning, even if there was somebody to teach them, which there's really not. And we see that Jane has gotten a job working indoors, where she is taking apart old clothing to make thread for new clothing. So she's literally unraveling the threads of cloth. And yeah, it's a little heavy on the metaphor, but I guess it works. So now we see we're 13 years after the attack, and Jane gets attacked by a couple of men.
Wanby, Seaton, and Coney. Gizu! Better, Eltuzzle Brian!
Best stand off so again!
Gizu! Warren's Dopper!
This scene is fairly controversial because there is, at one point, one of the guys chases her into a barn and pins her down, and then the camera kind of pulls away, and it's implied that they're having sex. And a lot of people looked at this and thought that he was raping her, and it's pretty clear in the script that he's not. That they went from fighting to having sex, but that she was a willing participant. At least that's the way it is in the script. But this was a big controversy, and this is one of the reasons, we'll talk about later, that there was a lot of opposition to this film when it was first aired, or when it was first released. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But we see that Jane does, in fact, get pregnant. We see that they have created some steam-powered machinery. Since they don't have petroleum, they can use, coal or wood and generate steam. And so there's some steam-powered machinery in factories and tractors and things along those lines. And, we jump forward another almost year, I suppose, and Jane is ready to give birth. She's in labor. She goes into what is passing for a hospital, I guess, at this point, and trying to get them to help her, but they don't want to help her.
What's wrong? Have you been hurt? Babby, I'm coming!
Oh, no time for Babby's here.
I'm coming! Babby, I'm coming!
No time for Babby's here. You'll have to go home. Use your common sense.
I'm coming!
But eventually, they find her a bed, and they help her deliver the baby. You don't see the baby. You only see glimpse of part of it, but there's no noise, there's no sound. The baby, I don't know if the baby's stillborn or not, but they hand the baby to Jane, and Jane is like kind of physically repulsed by the child, and then we cut to black, and that's the end of the movie. So there's this very strong insinuation here that the generations born after the nuclear attack are going to have a really hard time reproducing and rebuilding the population up, if at all it is possible for them to do that at all. And we're only looking at one city here. So, we don't know what the rest of Europe looks like. We don't know what the United States looks like or the Soviet Union looks like. This is just a very small view, a very small story in, a much larger world. So, like I said, there's no hope in this film. Maybe there's a light at the end of the rainbow. Maybe there's a bright spot. Maybe, we have a little hope that we can rebuild. There's none of that in this film. This film ends on the bleakest of bleak notes, and that's Threads. So it was released on September 23rd, 1984 on BBC Two. 6.9 million people watched it, which is, in today's numbers is extraordinary. But then it was not shown again. It was not rebroadcast. People thought it was too much. They thought it was too hard. They thought that, it was too depressing, that it was so realistic that it would be upsetting people. It was broadcast again on August 1st, 1985, which was the anniversary of the Hiroshima bomb. But then it was not rebroadcast again until October of 2003. So almost 20 years, 18 years went by before the BBC showed this again. It was shown, I believe, one time in January of 1985 on TBS in the United States. And then this thing pretty much went in the can for, 20 years. It is available now. I think you can watch it on Apple TV. I think you can watch it on Amazon. And there's probably, some services in Europe that you can watch it on. But this movie was, under the radar for a long, long time. It's got a fair amount of positive reviews. I mean, it's got a fair amount. It's got a 100% on Rotten Tomatoes. It's got a 92 on Metacritic. There's no CineScore, obviously, because it was never released in theaters. Roger Ebert did not review it. John O'Connor of the New York Times said that the film is not a balanced discussion about the pros and cons of nuclear armaments. It is a candidly biased warning. It is calculated, unsettlingly powerful. This is not a movie that's like, oh, let's talk about it. This is a movie that's like, this is what's going to happen. And how are we here? And how are we not going to get any further? Is really what the question that this movie is asking. The Globe and Mail wrote, formidable and foreboding, Threads leaves nothing to our imagination and nothingness to our conscience. That little play on words, nothing and nothingness. It says that it depicts carnage without distancing the viewer, without once letting him retreat behind the safe wall of fictitious play. This movie does not let up at all. The director had said that it was pretty typical for BBC productions after they aired that there would be a bunch of phone calls into the BBC to, give comments and stuff. And there was really none of that after this film aired. And he thought that meant that it was a disaster. But it really what it meant was that people were just stunned and they were just sitting at home thinking about what they had just seen. So the film won a 1985 BAFTA award. It actually won a couple. It won Best Single Drama, Best Design, Best Film Cameraman, and Best Film Editor. It also got nominated for Costume Design, Makeup, and Sound. So it was really well received and it was very well respected. It's just, it's not the kind of thing that you're just going to put on a Sunday afternoon. So it left them in a kind of a difficult position, I guess. In 2025, Warp Films, who is the production house behind the miniseries Adolescence, said that they have acquired the option to develop a serialized adaptation of Threads. So Warp Films is looking to make a miniseries of this at some point. And as far as I know, it's not very far along in development, but it's something that I'd probably watch. So that's Threads. I wish I could give you the old go out and watch this. I think you should watch it. I think everybody should watch this, but it's a film that you need to really be ready to watch. This is not cinema for enjoyment. This is cinema for sitting back and really thinking about what the world is. Fortunately, we're not as close to the brink as we were in 1984. But that does not mean that we can't take truths out of this film. And especially when you look at the breakdown of the government and what they collapsed into, the idea of we're going to start taking control of things. We're going to start tightening the screws on everything. We're going to start rounding people up just because they may cause us a problem. We're going to start shutting down free speech because it's going to cause us a problem. We're going to hide behind anonymity in the work that we do because it might be unpopular or we might be the victims of retribution. This is the government collapsing into fascism under duress like this. And that is a stark warning even today. So thank you for listening. We're coming up on the end of the year. So as you know, I always do a film for the outgoing year. In this case, it's 1980. So we will be doing, for the end of the year, we will be doing a 1980 film. I know what we're doing. I've already started working on it. We'll be announcing it pretty soon. And that will probably be, that should be the only one left for this year. So we look forward to that. Obviously, Randall and I are going to do at least, hopefully, 2 more shows for the end of the year. And that's it, man. It's almost 2026. I can't even believe this year went by so fast. So check out our merch store. We have some things going on in there, some great holiday gifts. I may be throwing a promo code around. And thanks for listening. Catch you next time.